The wine-dark sea. Picture, if you will, the wine-dark sea of ancient Greece. That deep purple expanse stretching endlessly toward horizons that promised both fortune and ruin. The morning sun catches the crests of waves, each one carrying stories of merchants and dreamers, of cargo holds filled with hope and ambition. On this particular dawn, nearly 24 centuries ago, a young merchant named Zeno stands at the prow of his vessel. The weight he carries is not unlike yours. Though his burden takes the form of amphorae filled with precious Phoenician purple dye, stacked carefully in the belly of his ship. You know that feeling, don't you? When everything you've worked for, everything you've built, rests in a single moment, a single journey, a single decision that could change everything. Zeno has invested his entire fortune in this cargo. The purple dye, extracted from thousands of murex shells, represents months of negotiation, planning, calculation. It's the kind of venture that keeps you awake at night, running numbers, checking and rechecking every detail. He's sailing from Phoenicia to Athens, where wealthy citizens will pay handsomely for fabric that only royalty and the richest merchants can afford. The irony, of course, is that this purple, this color of emperors and wealth, comes from something so humble. Tiny sea snails, crushed and processed, their essence transformed into liquid gold. Perhaps there's something in that transformation we might consider later. But for now, let's stay with Zeno as his ship cuts through the Mediterranean swells. The crew works with practiced efficiency around him. These are men who know the sea's moods, who can read the sky like you might read a quarterly report. But this morning, something feels different. The air carries a weight that has nothing to do with humidity, a pressure that makes the sailors glance nervously at the horizon. You've felt this before, haven't you? That moment when everything seems fine on the surface, but some deeper instinct whispers that change is coming. The kind of change that arrives without invitation and reshapes everything you thought you knew about your path forward. The wind begins to shift. At first, it's subtle, a change in direction that requires the crew to adjust the sail. Zeno, focused on his ledgers, calculating potential profits, barely notices. He's doing what you've done countless times, projecting revenues, planning the next investment, building castles of possibility in his mind, but the sea, like the market, like life itself, has its own plans. Within the hour, the wind has become something else entirely. What started as a gentle shift becomes an insistent push, then a demanding shove. The ship begins to pitch and roll in ways that make even the experienced sailors exchange worried glances. Zeno finally looks up from his calculations. The sky has transformed. Where there was blue, now there's a wall of dark clouds approaching with the inevitability of fate itself. The sea, that wine-dark expanse that seemed so welcoming at dawn, has taken on the color of old blood, angry and unpredictable. This is the moment every merchant fears. Not the slow decline of a failing venture, but the sudden catastrophe that can erase years of careful planning in hours. The storm that appears without warning and changes everything. The captain shouts orders. Men scramble across the deck, securing cargo, adjusting rigging, preparing for what they all know is coming. But Zeno stands frozen, watching his carefully planned future dissolve into chaos. Have you ever been there? In that moment when forces beyond your control converge on what you're building? When all your preparation, all your expertise, all your careful planning suddenly feels insignificant against the sheer power of circumstances you never saw coming? The storm hits with the fury of the gods themselves. Rain arrives first, not gentle drops, but sheets of water driven horizontal by winds that seem to come from every direction at once. The ship lurches violently to port, then starboard, as waves that were mere swells an hour ago become moving mountains of water. Zeno grabs the nearest rope, his merchant's hands soft and uncalloused, already bleeding from the rough hemp. Below deck, he can hear his precious cargo shifting, those carefully secured amphorae of purple dye beginning to slide and crash against the hull. Each sound is like a coin dropping from his purse. Months of investment, plans for expansion, dreams of wealth and security, all of it grinding against wooden planks as the ship fights for its life. The crew works with desperate efficiency, but you can see it in their eyes. This isn't just another storm. This is the kind of tempest that swallows ships whole, that turns profitable voyages into cautionary tales told in harbors for generations. Lightning splits the sky, thunder follows so quickly it seems the storm is directly overhead. In those brief, brilliant moments, Zeno can see waves rising higher than his ship's mast, walls of water that shouldn't exist, that defy everything he thought he knew about the predictable, profitable routes between civilized ports. And then, the inevitable. The ship strikes something, a rock perhaps, or a reef that shouldn't be there. The sound is unmistakable. That deep, grinding crack that every sailor knows means the sea has won. Water begins pouring in. Not seeping, not trickling. Pouring. The purple dye, that precious cargo that represented Zeno's entire fortune, mixes with seawater in the hold. 24 centuries before you were born, a young merchant watches his life's work literally dissolve before his eyes. The ship is dying. What happens next occurs with the strange, dreamlike quality that catastrophe often brings. Time seems to slow and accelerate simultaneously. The crew abandons any pretense of saving the vessel and focuses on the only thing that matters now: survival. Zeno finds himself clutching a piece of the mast as the ship breaks apart around him. The storm that seemed so malevolent now simply seems indifferent. The sea doesn't care about his investment, his plans, his carefully calculated future. It simply is, vast and powerful and utterly unconcerned with human ambition. In the water, struggling to stay afloat, Zeno experiences something you might recognize: that moment of absolute clarity that sometimes comes in crisis, when all the noise and complexity of daily concerns suddenly falls away, and you're left with something much simpler and much more profound. He's lost everything. Every drachma invested, every plan carefully laid, every dream of merchant success, gone. Dissolved into the wine-dark sea like purple dye mixing with salt water. But he's alive. Clinging to that piece of wreckage, fighting the waves, Zeno discovers something unexpected. Without his cargo to worry about, without his ship to manage, without his fortune to protect, there's a strange kind of freedom in having nothing left to lose. The storm begins to exhaust itself as storms do. The waves, still massive, lose some of their fury. The rain continues, but the wind no longer screams with quite the same intensity. And Zeno, merchant of Cyprus, finds himself being pushed by current and tide toward a shore he can barely see through the mist and spray. Hours pass, or perhaps minutes. Time has lost its commercial meaning. There's only the rhythm of waves, the ache in his arms from holding onto the wreckage, and the gradual realization that the dark line ahead is indeed land. He washes ashore near Piraeus, the port of Athens, his intended destination, though not at all in the manner he'd planned. Crawling onto the rocky beach, coughing up seawater, Zeno takes inventory of his situation with the methodical mind that made him a successful merchant. Ship destroyed, cargo lost, crew scattered to the winds, hopefully alive, fortune completely gone, future plans meaningless, and yet, as he sits on that beach, watching the storm move away across the Mediterranean, something unexpected settles over him. Not despair, though that would be understandable. Not panic, though his situation certainly warrants it. Instead, there's a curious sense of possibility. For the first time in years, Zeno has no obligations, no cargo to deliver, no investors to satisfy, no schedules to keep. The weight he's carried, that constant pressure of commercial success and financial security, has been lifted by forces entirely beyond his control. He's lost everything, yes, but perhaps that's not entirely a loss. Standing on shaking legs, wringing seawater from his ruined clothes, Zeno looks toward Athens. He has no money for lodging, no goods to sell, no clear path forward. He is, in every practical sense, starting over from nothing, but he's in Athens, the center of learning in the ancient world. And for the first time in his adult life, he has something more valuable than purple dye, more precious than a successful cargo. He has questions. What just happened to him? Why do storms arise? What does it mean to lose everything and yet somehow feel, not defeated, but curious? How does a man find meaning when all his carefully laid plans dissolve like dye in seawater? These questions, born from catastrophe and nurtured by loss, will lead him somewhere he never expected to go. Somewhere that will change not just his life, but the lives of countless others across the centuries, including perhaps yours. But that journey begins with a single step, toward the city, toward the unknown, toward questions he doesn't yet know how to ask. Athens awakens. That first step takes him along a dusty coastal path, where the Mediterranean sun beats down on his salt-crusted shoulders, the weight of his sodden robes, the ache in his muscles from fighting the waves. These physical discomforts are nothing compared to the strange lightness he feels inside. You know this feeling, don't you? When the thing you've been dreading finally happens, when the client leaves, when the funding falls through, when the carefully constructed plan collapses. And somehow, in that moment of apparent defeat, there's an unexpected clarity, a freedom born from having nothing left to lose. Zeno walks, and as he walks, the path begins to widen. Other travelers join the route, merchants with laden donkeys, farmers carrying baskets of olives, pilgrims heading toward the great city. The air fills with voices, with languages he recognizes and others he doesn't. Greek mingles with Egyptian, Phoenician with Persian. This is the road to Piraeus, Athens' great port, the beating heart that pumps the lifeblood of trade and ideas through the ancient world. As the afternoon sun begins its descent, Zeno crests a small hill and sees it spread before him, the port of Piraeus in all its chaotic glory. Ships crowd the harbor like a forest of masts, merchant vessels from Egypt heavy with grain, sleek warships with bronze rams gleaming in the sunlight, fishing boats bobbing between the giants like children among adults. The noise hits him first. The creak of rope and timber, the shouts of dock workers hauling cargo, the splash of oars and the snap of sails catching wind. Then come the smells, salt and tar, fish and sweat, exotic spices from lands whose names he's only heard whispered in trading houses. For a man who built his life on the orderly world of commerce, who understood value and profit and the careful choreography of trade, this is overwhelming. Like stepping from a quiet library into a thunderstorm. You felt this, haven't you? That moment when you're thrust into an environment that demands everything of you. When the familiar rhythms of your carefully controlled world give way to something vast and unpredictable. When you realize that all your planning, all your preparation, means nothing in the face of pure, chaotic life. Zeno makes his way down into the port proper, past vendors hawking everything from dried fish to silk scarves. Children dart between his legs, chasing rolling coins or fleeing angry merchants. Dogs bark, gulls cry, and somewhere a musician plays a haunting melody on a wooden flute. He has no money now, no goods to trade, no letters of credit, no reputation to lean on. He's just another figure in the crowd, anonymous and adrift. The purple stain on his fingers, once the mark of his prosperity, now feels like a memory from another life. But here's what's remarkable about the human spirit: how quickly we adapt when we have no choice. How the mind, freed from its familiar patterns, begins to notice things it never saw before. Zeno finds himself watching the faces around him, really watching. The weathered dock worker whose eyes light up when he sees his son running toward him. The elderly woman selling bread who slips an extra roll to a hungry child when she thinks no one is looking. The ship captain arguing with a customs official, their heated words dissolving into laughter when they realize they're distant cousins from the same island. These are not the calculations of commerce. These are the transactions of the human heart, and they operate by entirely different rules. As evening approaches, Zeno realizes he needs shelter. But with empty pockets, his options are limited. He wanders through the narrowing streets that lead up from the port toward the city proper, past taverns where sailors drink and sing, past workshops where craftsmen hammer bronze and shape clay even as daylight fades. The streets grow quieter as he climbs, more residential, more refined. Oil lamps begin to flicker in windows. Families gather for evening meals. The chaos of the port gives way to something more contemplative, more Athenian. And then, on a corner where two narrow streets meet, he sees something that stops him in his tracks. A small shop, its doorway illuminated by the warm glow of several oil lamps. But this isn't selling pottery or cloth or wine. The shelves visible through the open door are lined with scrolls, hundreds of them, their papyrus surfaces catching the lamplight like captured sunlight. A bookshop. Here, in this corner of the ancient world, someone has gathered the thoughts and words and wisdom of minds both living and dead. You might not think this remarkable. You who carry more knowledge in your pocket than entire libraries once held. But imagine a world where ideas traveled slowly, where wisdom was precious precisely because it was rare, where to encounter the thoughts of a great mind you had to seek them out, to make pilgrimage to where they lived in physical form. Zeno approaches slowly, drawn by something he can't quite name. The shop's owner, an elderly man with ink-stained fingers and intelligent eyes, looks up from the scroll he's been reading. "Lost?" the old man asks, and there's kindness in his voice. Zeno considers this question more deeply than it was probably intended. "Yes," he says finally. "Completely." The bookseller smiles. "Ah, then you've come to the right place. Every book here was written by someone who was lost, at least for a while." He gestures to the scrolls around him. Philosophy, poetry, history, mathematics, all of it born from people trying to make sense of a world that seemed senseless, trying to find solid ground in shifting sand. And here, in this moment, something shifts in Zeno's understanding. All his life, he's thought of knowledge as a tool, something to be used, leveraged, converted into advantage. But looking at these scrolls, he sees something different. Knowledge as comfort, wisdom as companionship, ideas as a bridge between one struggling soul and another across the centuries. "I have no money," Zeno admits. The old man shrugs. Money comes and goes. Curiosity is rarer. He pulls a scroll from a nearby shelf. "Xenophanes," he says, "a philosopher from Colophon. He wrote about the nature of truth, about how what we think we know might not be knowledge at all, but simply opinion." He unrolls a section and reads, "If horses could draw, they would draw their gods as horses. If oxen could draw, they would draw their gods as oxen." Makes you think, doesn't it? About the stories we tell ourselves, about what we assume is true simply because it's familiar. Zeno stares at the text, these words written by a man long dead, but somehow still speaking, still questioning, still challenging comfortable assumptions. "Take it," the bookseller says, "read it tonight. Bring it back tomorrow and tell me what you think. Then we'll find you another." "But I told you, I have nothing to pay with." The old man's eyes twinkle. "You have questions, don't you? Questions born from loss, from confusion, from having your certainties stripped away. Those are the most valuable currency in a place like this." And so Zeno finds himself walking through the darkening streets of Piraeus with a scroll tucked under his arm. His first book, his first step into a world he never knew existed. The weight of it feels different from the weight of gold or silver, lighter in his hands, but somehow heavier in significance. He finds shelter that night in a small inn, where the owner, taking pity on his obvious distress, offers him a corner of the common room in exchange for help with the morning cleaning. As the other guests settle into sleep, Zeno unrolls the scroll by lamplight and begins to read. The words are strange at first, not the practical language of trade and commerce he's used to, but something more searching, more honest about the limits of human understanding, more comfortable with uncertainty. And as he reads, as these ancient thoughts begin to reshape his modern confusion, Zeno realizes something profound. The shipwreck didn't just destroy his cargo, it destroyed his assumptions about what mattered, about what was real, about what it meant to live a meaningful life. In losing everything he thought he wanted, he's found something he didn't even know he was looking for. The questions that will define the rest of his life and echo through the centuries to reach you, lying in your bed, carrying your own weight, building your own dreams. These questions are just beginning to form. But already, in this small inn in ancient Piraeus, with borrowed wisdom spread before him and the future completely uncertain, already Zeno is becoming someone new, someone who understands that the most important journeys begin not when we know where we're going, but when we finally admit we're lost. Hack, the cynic's wisdom. The next morning finds Zeno walking through Athens as the sun climbs above the marble columns of the Parthenon. His borrowed sandals, still too large, slap softly against the worn stones of the agora. The weight of yesterday's reading sits differently in his chest now. Not heavy like the anxiety that keeps you awake, but substantial, like carrying something precious. He asks a potter about philosophers, then a weaver. Finally, a young man selling figs points toward the edge of the marketplace. "You want crates," he says with a knowing smile. "The one who gave away his fortune. You'll know him when you see him." And Zeno does know him, immediately. There, beneath a plane tree whose leaves filter the morning light into dancing patterns, sits a man unlike anyone Zeno has ever encountered. Crates of Thebes wears a rough cloak that has seen better decades. His beard is wild, streaked with grey, and his feet are bare. But his eyes hold the kind of clarity that comes only from having looked directly at life's hardest truths and chosen to smile anyway. Around him, a small crowd has gathered. Not the wealthy citizens who usually attract audiences in the agora, but ordinary people. A baker still dusted with flour, a young mother bouncing a restless child, an old soldier leaning on a walking stick. "Tell me," Crates is saying, his voice carrying easily across the space, "what makes a man rich?" "Gold," calls out the baker. "Land, a full storehouse." Crates nods thoughtfully. "And what makes a man poor?" "Having none of those things," comes a voice from the back. "Ah." Crates stands, brushing dust from his cloak. "But I have none of those things. I own this cloak, which has more holes than fabric. I sleep wherever night finds me. I eat what people share or what I can gather. By your measure, I should be the poorest man in Athens." He pauses, letting his gaze sweep across the faces watching him. "Yet I wake each morning without worry about thieves. I never lie awake, calculating profits or losses. I fear no market crash, no failed harvest, no rival's success. I am free to think, to learn, to help where I can. I am free to be fully present in this moment, with you, under this tree, in this conversation that may change how we see everything." Zeno feels something shift inside his chest, like a door opening in a room he didn't know existed. "So I ask you again," Crates continues, settling back down, "what makes a man rich?" The crowd is quieter now. The baker looks thoughtful. The young mother has stopped bouncing her child. "Peace of mind," ventures the old soldier. Getting closer, Crates smiles. "What else? Not needing things?" The young mother's voice is uncertain but curious. "Better still, what makes you truly wealthy? What no storm can sink, no thief can steal, no market can crash, is understanding what you actually need versus what you think you want." Zeno thinks of his ship, his purple dye, the weight of those losses that somehow led him here. "Most of us," Crates continues, "spend our lives building elaborate prisons. We tell ourselves we need bigger houses, finer clothes, more recognition, larger profits. We work harder and harder to afford things we don't actually enjoy, to impress people we don't actually like, to achieve goals that someone else defined as success. You know this feeling, don't you? That 2 a.m. realization that you're running very fast on a path you never consciously chose. But what if, Crates asks, what if the real poverty is not having too little, but needing too much? As the crowd begins to disperse, Zeno approaches. His heart beats the way it used to before important negotiations, but different somehow, cleaner. "Master Crates," he begins, then stops. The word master feels wrong for this man who owns nothing and claims no titles. "Just Crates," the philosopher says, looking up with those clear eyes. "And you are?" "Zeno, I am—" He struggles with how to introduce himself. Yesterday he would have mentioned his family's trading business, his connections, his wealth. Now those words feel like clothes that no longer fit. "You are someone seeking something," Crates observes gently. "That's enough for now. Sit." Zeno settles onto the ground beside him. The earth is warm from the sun, solid beneath him. When did he last sit directly on the ground? When did he last feel the actual world supporting him instead of cushions and chairs and the elaborate comfort that keeps us separated from what's real? "I lost everything in a shipwreck," Zeno finds himself saying. "My cargo, my ship, my fortune. I should be devastated. I should be planning how to rebuild, how to borrow money, how to start again. But I feel lighter, like I've been carrying something heavy for so long, I forgot it wasn't part of my body. And now it's gone, and I can breathe properly for the first time in years." Crates nods as if this makes perfect sense. "Tell me about this weight you carried." And Zeno does. He talks about the constant calculation, profit margins and shipping schedules and market fluctuations. The way every conversation became an opportunity to network, every friendship measured by its potential value. The sleepless nights worrying about things completely outside his control. Storms and pirates and political changes in distant ports. I was successful, he says finally. By every measure that matters to the world, I was winning. So why did it feel like I was slowly disappearing? Because, Crates says, you were. Success, as the world defines it, often requires us to become smaller. We focus so narrowly on accumulating and achieving that we forget to notice, to think, to be present for our own lives. A warm breeze moves through the plane tree above them. Somewhere nearby, a street musician plays a simple melody on a reed pipe. The sounds of the agora, conversations and laughter, and the calls of vendors create a backdrop that feels alive in a way Zeno's former world of contracts and cargo manifests never did. What you lost in that shipwreck, Crates continues, was not your wealth. It was your illusions about what wealth actually means. The storm didn't take anything real from you. It revealed what was real. But surely we need some things, Zeno says. Food, shelter, basic security. Of course. The cynic way isn't about suffering for its own sake. It's about clarity, about distinguishing between what you actually need and what society has convinced you to want. Crates picks up a small stone, turns it over in his palm. This stone needs nothing from me. It doesn't require my attention or my worry. It simply is. There's a kind of freedom in that simplicity, a strength. But humans aren't stones. No, Crates smiles. We're more complicated. We have minds that can think, hearts that can feel, hands that can create. But we also have the capacity to want things that make us miserable, to chase goals that move further away the faster we run toward them. He sets the stone down gently. The question isn't whether to want things. The question is, do your wants serve your flourishing, or do you serve your wants? Zeno thinks about this, about the years he spent serving his wants. For more profit, more recognition, more of everything. About how those wants had grown larger and more demanding, like pets that become too big for their cages. How do you tell the difference, he asks. By paying attention, by noticing what actually makes you feel more alive versus what just makes you feel more important. By asking whether your goals are making you more generous or more anxious, more present or more distracted. A child runs past, chasing a wooden hoop with a stick. Her laughter is pure, unself-conscious. She's completely absorbed in this simple game, completely present to this moment. Watch her, Crates says softly. She's not running toward happiness. She is happiness. She's not trying to achieve joy. She is joy. This is what we lose when we make our well-being conditional on external circumstances. But she's a child. The world will teach her to want things, to compete, to worry about her future. Yes, Crates agrees. And that teaching will make her more sophisticated. But will it make her more alive? Will it make her happier? Will it make her more capable of love, of wonder, of being present to the beauty that surrounds us every moment? The sun has climbed higher now. The shadows under the plane tree have shifted, shortened. Zeno realizes he has been sitting here for hours without once thinking about what he should be doing instead. Without that familiar anxiety about productivity, about making the most of his time. This is what freedom feels like, he says, almost to himself. Yes, Crates says, and it's always available. Not because your circumstances are perfect, but because you remember who you are underneath all the stories about what you should want and who you should become. As the afternoon light begins to slant golden across the agora, Zeno understands that something fundamental has shifted. Not just in his thinking, but in his being. Like a knot he didn't know he was carrying has finally loosened. The weight you carry, the pressure to achieve and accumulate and prove yourself, it doesn't have to define you. What you're building, it can be something simpler and stronger than you imagined. Something that no storm can sink. Nature's embrace. The next morning finds Zeno walking beyond the city walls, drawn by something he can't quite name. The bustle of Athens fades behind him as his feet find an ancient path winding through silver-green olive groves. Here in the gentle hills surrounding the city, the air moves differently, softer. The leaves whisper secrets to each other in a language older than commerce. older than ambition. You know this feeling, don't you? When you finally step away from the endless demands, when you give yourself permission to simply be present, the world doesn't stop turning, but something in you settles. Zeno finds himself beneath an ancient olive tree, its trunk gnarled and weathered by centuries of seasons. He places his palm against the bark, feeling the deep grooves carved by time itself. This tree has weathered storms that would have terrified him just days ago. Yet here it stands, rooted, resilient, offering shade to anyone who seeks it. The morning sun filters through the canopy above, creating patterns of light and shadow that dance across his hands. He watches these patterns shift and change, and for the first time in years, he's not calculating anything, not planning the next move, not measuring profit against loss. He's simply watching. A gentle breeze stirs the branches, and the sound is like water over stones. Peaceful, constant, the kind of sound that reminds you that some things endure not by fighting, but by flowing. In your own moments of stillness, when you step away from what you're building, you might notice this same quality. The way the world continues its ancient rhythms, whether your latest project succeeds or fails, whether the funding comes through or doesn't, whether tomorrow brings triumph or setback. There's something profoundly liberating in this recognition. Zeno closes his eyes and breathes deeply. The air carries the scent of wild herbs, thyme and rosemary growing in the spaces between the olive trees. These plants ask for nothing. They simply grow where they're planted, offering their fragrance to anyone who passes by. He thinks of his lost ships, his scattered cargo, the purple dye now feeding the fish at the bottom of the Mediterranean. And for the first time, he feels something approaching gratitude for that loss. Not because losing everything was pleasant, but because it stripped away the layers of who he thought he had to be, revealing something simpler underneath, something that was always there, waiting to be discovered. Like you, beneath all the weight you carry, beneath all the roles you play and the expectations you meet, there's something essential that remains untouched by external circumstances, something that doesn't depend on quarterly results or market conditions or anyone else's approval. Zeno opens his eyes and notices a spider working methodically in a corner of the olive tree. Thread by thread, she's building her web, not with frantic urgency, but with patient precision. When a breeze disturbs her work, she simply waits for stillness and continues. No anxiety about deadlines, no second-guessing her design, just building what needs to be built, one thread at a time. He watches her for a long while, mesmerized by the simplicity of her purpose. She's not trying to build the biggest web in the grove. She's not competing with other spiders. She's creating exactly what she needs. Nothing more, nothing less. What if the things you're building could have this same quality, this same natural rhythm? What if success didn't have to feel like a constant battle against time and circumstance? The sun climbs higher, and Zeno finds himself walking deeper into the grove. His feet follow no particular path now, just moving where the ground feels firm, where the light beckons him forward. He comes upon a small clearing where wildflowers grow in casual abundance. Poppies and chamomile, their faces turned toward the sun. No one planted them here. No one tends them or measures their growth, yet they bloom with a vitality that puts his old merchant gardens to shame. He sits among them, feeling the earth beneath him, solid and supportive. The weight of his body settles into the ground, and he realizes how long it's been since he truly felt held, supported by something larger than his own efforts. When did you last feel this? This sense of being supported rather than supporting, of resting rather than pushing, of trusting that the ground beneath you is solid, even when everything else feels uncertain. A butterfly lands on a nearby poppy, its wings catching the light like stained glass. Zeno watches it drink deeply from the flower's center, then lift away on currents invisible to his eyes. It knows exactly where it's going, not because it's planned the route, but because it trusts the wind to carry it. There's wisdom in this trust, this willingness to be guided by forces larger than individual will. Zeno lies back in the grass, feeling the earth cradle his shoulders, his spine, his head. Above him, clouds drift across an endless blue sky. He watches them form and dissolve, merge and separate, always changing, yet somehow always perfect in their impermanence. Your worries, your fears about what you're building. They're like these clouds, real in this moment, but not permanent. Not solid. They arise and pass away like weather patterns across the vast sky of your awareness. And you, the one who watches the clouds, you're like the sky itself, spacious enough to hold whatever arises, stable enough to remain untroubled by passing storms. The afternoon grows warm, and Zeno feels his eyelids growing heavy. Not the exhausted collapse he knew as a merchant, but a natural settling, like leaves drifting down from the tree above. He doesn't fight this drowsiness. Instead, he lets himself drift, half sleeping, half waking, aware of the sounds around him, but not needing to categorize or respond to them. A bird calls from somewhere in the canopy. Another answers from across the clearing. They're not solving problems or making plans. They're simply communicating, being present with each other across the distance. In this drowsy state, Zeno's mind begins to wander, but not in the frantic way it used to. More like the butterfly, trusting the currents to carry him where he needs to go. He thinks of creaks, of the wisdom that flows so naturally from the old philosopher, like water from a spring, not forced or manufactured, just emerging from some deep source within. Perhaps this is what he's been searching for without knowing it. Not new knowledge to accumulate, but access to the wisdom that's always been there. Like the underground streams that feed these olive trees, invisible but essential. The weight you carry. It doesn't have to be a burden. It can be like the earth itself, solid, grounding, supportive. What you're building. It can grow like these wildflowers, naturally, beautifully, without strain. A gentle breeze stirs the clearing, carrying the scent of sun-warmed earth and growing things. Zeno breathes it in, feeling it fill not just his lungs, but his entire being. This is what abundance feels like, he realizes. Not the accumulation of things, but this sense of being fed by life itself. When he finally opens his eyes, the light has shifted. Late afternoon now, golden and slanted, painting everything with a warm glow. He sits up slowly, feeling refreshed in a way that has nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with remembering. Remembering that he belongs here, in this moment, in this clearing, in this life that continues to unfold whether he controls it or not. The path back to Athens winds through more olive groves, past stone walls built by hands long since returned to dust. Zeno walks slowly, in no hurry to return to the world of human concerns, but when he does return, when he rejoins the flow of daily life, he carries something with him, a quality of presence, a sense of being rooted in something larger than his individual story. Like the olive tree that sheltered him, he's beginning to understand what it means to be both flexible and strong, to bend with the storms without breaking, to offer shade and sustenance not from a sense of obligation, but from the natural overflow of a life well-rooted. The city walls come into view as the sun begins its descent toward the horizon. Athens awaits, with all its noise and complexity and endless human drama. But Zeno is no longer the same man who left this morning. Something has shifted. Not dramatically, but deeply, like a river changing course. Not all at once, but gradually, following the natural contours of the land. What you're building, it can have this same quality, this same natural flow, rooted in something deeper than ambition or fear, guided by wisdom rather than worry. The weight you carry, it can become like the earth beneath your feet, not a burden to escape, but a foundation to build upon. As Zeno approaches the city gates, the olive groves behind him settling into evening shadow, he carries with him the memory of that ancient tree, its patient strength, its generous shade, and somewhere in the growing twilight, the spider continues her work, thread by thread, moment by moment, building exactly what needs to be built. And seeds of Stoicism. The gates of Athens stand before him, weathered stone archways that have witnessed countless arrivals, merchants with laden carts, scholars carrying scrolls, travelers dusty from distant roads. But Zeno enters differently than he might have months ago, when his ship still sailed heavy with purple cargo. Then he would have rushed through these gates, mind already calculating, planning, grasping for the next opportunity. Now, his steps are measured, deliberate. Each footfall connects him to the earth beneath, the same earth that nourishes those patient olive trees. The streets of Athens pulse with familiar energy. Voices calling from market stalls, the ring of hammer on metal, children laughing as they chase each other between the columns. Yet something has shifted in how Zeno perceives it all. Where once he saw only opportunity or obstacle, now he observes the deeper currents. The merchant haggling over grain prices, driven by the same fears that once consumed Zeno's nights, the politician gesturing grandly to his followers, seeking in their approval what cannot be found in external validation, and threading through it all, that quiet recognition, the weight these people carry, not so different from his own. He finds himself drawn to the agora, that great beating heart of Athenian discourse. Here, beneath the painted stoa, philosophers and teachers gather their students. Voices rise and fall in debate. Questions chase answers in endless, spiraling dance. Zeno takes his place among the listeners. But increasingly, people begin to notice something in his presence. A quality of attention that draws them closer. When he speaks, which he does more frequently now, his words carry the authority of someone who has lost everything and discovered it was not loss at all. "Tell me," asks a young merchant, clearly troubled by some burden, "how does one find peace when the world demands so much? When every day brings new crises, new decisions that could ruin everything we've built?" Zeno considers this, remembering his own sleepless nights aboard ship, the endless calculations, the weight of responsibility that seemed to press down like storm clouds. "Perhaps," he says slowly, "the question isn't how to escape the weight, but how to understand what we're truly carrying." A small crowd begins to gather, drawn by something in his tone, the measured certainty of someone who has walked through fire and emerged not burned, but refined. "I once believed," Zeno continues, "that my worth lay in my cargo. Purple dye from distant shores, each bolt worth more than most men earn in a year. I carried that weight like armor, protecting me from the world's judgments." He pauses, allowing the memory to surface without the old sting of loss. "But when the storm came, when everything I thought defined me sank beneath the waves, I discovered something remarkable. The weight that mattered, the strength that truly served me, had been there all along, not in my cargo holds, but in my capacity to choose how I would respond." An older woman nods, recognition flickering in her eyes. "But surely," she says, "some things matter more than others. My children, my family. These cannot be just choices." "No," Zeno agrees, his voice gentle but firm. "Love is not a choice in that way. Care for those we hold dear, this springs from our deepest nature. But here's what I've learned." He gestures toward the bustling agora around them, the endless dance of human striving. "We cannot control whether our children will be healthy, whether our businesses will prosper, whether the storms will spare our ships. But we can choose, moment by moment, how we will meet what comes. With wisdom or with panic, with courage or with despair, with love or with fear." The crowd grows larger, people drawn by this message that somehow acknowledges their burdens without dismissing them. That offers strength without promising easy answers. "I spent years," Zeno says, "trying to control outcomes, lying awake calculating every variable, as if worry were a form of preparation, as if anxiety could somehow protect the things I valued most." A merchant laughs, the sound carrying both recognition and relief. "I know those nights well. But here's what the olive trees taught me." Zeno's voice takes on the rhythm of natural wisdom. "They don't worry about the harvest, they simply grow, season by season, trusting in their own nature, extending their roots deeper, reaching toward the light, responding to drought and plenty with the same fundamental commitment to flourishing." The philosophical framework emerging from these conversations, these daily gatherings beneath the painted columns, begins to take distinctive shape. Not the harsh renunciation Crates might advocate, but something more nuanced, more practical for those who carry real responsibilities. Virtue, Zeno explains to his growing circle of listeners, isn't about perfection. It's about alignment, living in harmony with our deepest nature, which is rational, social, creative. Building what serves not just ourselves, but the larger web of human flourishing. A young woman raises her hand, the gesture of someone wrestling with practical application. "But what about ambition? What about the drive to create? to build something meaningful. Surely that matters. Zeno's eyes brighten, recognizing the question that might have consumed his former self. Absolutely it matters. But consider this. What if our ambition could serve something larger than our own security? What if the businesses we build, the families we nurture, the communities we strengthen, what if these became expressions of virtue rather than just personal achievement? He pauses, letting the distinction settle. When I carried those bolts of purple dye, I was building my reputation, my wealth, my protection against uncertainty. Noble enough goals, but limited. Fragile, dependent on forces beyond my control. The crowd leans in, sensing the deeper teaching approaching. But when we build from virtue, when our work serves justice, courage, wisdom, temperance, then even if the external results disappoint us, even if the storms come, something essential remains intact. Something that cannot be shipwrecked. These daily teachings, these conversations that stretch from morning into afternoon, begin to attract not just casual listeners but dedicated students. People who return day after day, bringing their own insights, their own questions, their own struggles with the gap between philosophical ideals and daily pressures. Marcus, a potter whose workshop employs a dozen craftsmen, shares his attempts to apply these principles to business decisions. I find myself asking, not just what will increase profits, but what serves the flourishing of my workers. What creates beauty that enriches our community? Eleanor, a mother of 3, describes her efforts to parent from this deeper foundation. When my children face disappointments, I try to help them see not just the pain of what they cannot control, but the power of how they choose to respond. Week by week, these conversations deepen. The philosophical framework becomes more refined, more practical, more tested against the complexities of real life. Zeno finds himself articulating principles that seem to emerge from the very experiences that brought him here. The shipwreck that taught him about acceptance, the olive groves that showed him natural patience, the spider that demonstrated persistent, purposeful action. We are like gardeners, he tells his students one afternoon as shadows lengthen across the agora. We cannot control the weather, the soil conditions, the countless variables that influence growth, but we can choose our seeds carefully. We can tend them with wisdom. We can trust the process while taking responsibility for our part in it. The teaching feels less like instruction and more like recognition, as if these truths were always present, waiting to be uncovered rather than imposed. And in the growing community of practitioners, people who gather not just to discuss philosophy, but to live it, Zeno begins to see something remarkable taking shape. Not a school in the traditional sense, but a way of being that people can carry into their workshops and homes, their businesses and relationships. The weight they all carry. It hasn't disappeared. But somehow, it has transformed, from burden into purpose, from anxiety into engaged wisdom. As evening approaches and the agora begins to empty, Zeno often walks alone through the quieting streets, past workshops where craftsmen are cleaning their tools, past homes where families gather for evening meals, past temples where citizens offer their gratitude for the day's blessings. And in these moments, he feels connected to something vast and purposeful, the same force that guides the spider's patient weaving, that sustains the olive tree's generous growth, that transforms storms into opportunities for deeper wisdom. The seeds of what will become known as Stoicism, taking root not in abstract theory, but in the lived experience of people learning to flourish within the constraints and possibilities of human existence, building exactly what needs to be built, one conversation at a time, our finding peace, and so the teachings find their home in a place that will give them their name. The Stoa Poikil, the painted colonnade, where merchants pause between transactions and citizens gather in the shade of marble columns. Here, beneath frescoes depicting ancient victories and mythic scenes, Zeno establishes what will become his school. Not a school in any formal sense, no fees collected, no certificates granted, simply a place where those carrying weight can pause and learn to carry it differently. The painted walls seem to listen as conversations unfold, morning after morning, season after season, a potter worried about his rival's success, learning that excellence in his craft matters more than comparison. A widow managing her late husband's affairs, discovering that grief and strength can coexist in the same heart. Each person who approaches brings their own shipwreck, their own moment when the familiar world shifted beneath their feet. Zeno recognizes the look now, that mixture of exhaustion and searching that he once wore himself. "Tell me about what keeps you awake," he says gently to a young woman whose family business teeters on the edge of failure. The same question Crates might have asked him, all those years ago. She speaks of sleepless nights, of calculations that never quite add up, of the weight of others depending on her decisions. Her words echo with the same anxiety that once drove Zeno to pace his ship's deck, watching the horizon for storms. "And what would happen," Zeno asks, "if you accepted that some storms cannot be avoided, only navigated?" The conversation that follows moves like water finding its course, from resistance to acceptance, from panic to purposeful action, not because the problems disappear, but because the relationship to them transforms. This is what Zeno has learned to offer, not solutions to external circumstances, but a different way of standing within them. The philosophy taking shape here isn't about eliminating difficulty, but about finding unshakable ground beneath your fare, regardless of what storms may come. Years pass in this rhythm, the painted colonnade becoming a refuge for minds seeking stillness. Merchants and craftspeople, parents and leaders, all learning that true wealth lies not in what you possess, but in how you respond to what life presents. Zeno watches his students, if they can be called that, as they begin to carry themselves differently. The same challenges remain, the same pressures and uncertainties, but something fundamental has shifted in how they meet each day. The potter no longer checks obsessively on his rival's work, focused instead on the clay beneath his hands. The widow makes her decisions with quiet confidence, trusting in her ability to respond wisely to whatever unfolds. The young woman with the failing business, she still works long hours, but sleeps more peacefully, knowing she has done what virtue requires. They have learned what Zeno learned in that olive grove, that there is a natural order to things, a way of flowing with circumstances rather than exhausting yourself in futile resistance. Not passive acceptance, but engaged wisdom, acting where action serves, resting where struggle would waste precious energy. The afternoon sun slants through the colonnade, casting long shadows across the marble floor. Zeno sits quietly, watching dust motes dance in the golden light, and marvels at the journey that brought him here. That merchant who once gripped the ship's rail, knuckles white with anxiety about his cargo, feels like another person now, not because life became easier, but because he learned to work with its natural rhythms rather than against them. The purple dye that once seemed so precious, scattered now across some distant seafloor, has been replaced by something far more valuable: the capacity to help others find their footing when the ground shifts beneath them, the ability to offer steady presence in the midst of uncertainty. This is what he was meant to build, not a trading empire, but a way of living that could weather any storm, not just for himself, but for anyone willing to learn. The painted figures on the walls seem to nod their approval. Ancient warriors and wise kings who knew something about carrying weight with dignity. They have witnessed countless conversations in this space, watched minds move from agitation to clarity, hearts open from fear to courage. As evening approaches, the last questioner of the day departs, carrying with him not answers but better questions, the kind that lead to wisdom rather than mere cleverness. Zeno remains in the colonnade as shadows lengthen, feeling the day's conversation settle into deeper understanding. Each person who came seeking help also offered something in return. Their struggles illuminated new aspects of the philosophy taking shape here. Their breakthroughs confirmed its practical value. This is how truth emerges, not from isolated contemplation, but from the patient work of living wisely in community with others. Each conversation a thread woven into a larger tapestry of understanding. The same collaborative spirit that built Athens, stone upon stone, conversation upon conversation, is building something equally enduring here. A framework for living that will outlast any individual because it serves the deepest needs of human nature. Night falls gently over the agora, torches beginning to flicker in the gathering darkness. Zeno makes his way through familiar streets, past workshops where craftspeople are cleaning their tools, past homes where families gather for evening meals. He thinks of all the invisible weight being carried through this city, the worries and responsibilities, the hopes and fears that follow people into sleep. Tomorrow many of them will find their way to the painted colonnade, seeking not escape from their burdens, but wisdom for carrying them well. This is the gift born from his own shipwreck, the understanding that catastrophe can become teacher, that loss can reveal what truly matters. Not a lesson he would have chosen to learn, but one that transformed everything it touched. The stars emerge one by one, the same constellations that guided his merchant ships, that watched over his desperate swim to shore, that illuminated his first conversations with creaks. Constant witnesses to the great transformation that began with disaster and bloomed into purpose. Standing in his small garden, Zeno looks up at the vast tapestry of night sky and feels the deep peace that comes from alignment with natural order. The same force that moves the stars, that grows the olive trees, that weaves the spider's web, flows through human life as well. Understanding this, accepting this, working with this rather than against it, this is the essence of what he has learned to teach. Not complicated theories, but simple recognition of how things actually work, and how to live in harmony with that reality. The anxious merchant who once calculated profits by lamplight has been replaced by someone who trusts the larger pattern, who acts with virtue and accepts outcomes with equanimity. The transformation feels complete, yet always beginning anew with each dawn. Tomorrow will bring new conversations, new opportunities to share what has been learned through lived experience. The painted colonnade will fill again with voices, seeking and finding, questioning and understanding. But tonight, there is simply this: the quiet satisfaction of work well done, of weight carried with dignity, of a life aligned with its deepest purpose. The stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human anxiety, yet somehow blessing the small efforts toward wisdom that unfold beneath their light. Zeno breathes deeply, feeling his place in the vast order of things, no longer fighting the current but flowing with it, building exactly what needs to be built, teaching exactly what needs to be taught, resting now in the peace that comes from accepting both the magnitude of the universe and the precious significance of each small act of virtue within it.